Willkommen to the second installment of my ranking of every Kander and Ebb musical based on listening to the original Broadway cast album. Today we're talking about Cabaret from 1966. Not the Bob Fosse directed movie starring Liza Minnelli, not the 90s gritty revival starring Alan Cumming, and not the revival that's been running in London for the past 5 years. All of those versions influenced the popular conception of what Cabaret is as a musical, so much so that the original production rarely gets discussed anymore. I want to talk about why that is and what it is about this piece that has made it one of the most iconic musicals of all time. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I'm Tim. I'm a theater critic based in New York. My last video discussed the very first Kander and Ebb show, Flora the Red Menace, and in it I also explain the methodology I'm using for this ranking. Be sure to watch that one. Cabaret opened on Broadway in November 1966 at the Broadhurst Theater, and it closed in 1969 after running 1,166 performances and 21 previews. It was a huge hit. I don't think people remember that because the 90s revival ran twice as long, but this version was a huge hit, and it swept the 1967 Tonys, winning 8 awards including Best Musical and the first Best Original Score win for Kander and Ebb. It's the story of an American writer, Cliff Bradshaw, who comes to Berlin at the end of 1929 looking for inspiration and finds it in the vivacious nightclub singer Sally Bowles. A secondary plot sees Cliff's landlady falling in love with a Jewish shopkeeper. Both couples face challenges as it becomes more and more apparent that the Nazi Party is rising to power. The whole show is presided over by a crude and enigmatic master of ceremonies. Hal Prince directed and produced. Joe Masteroff wrote the book, based on a John Van Druten play, I Am a Camera, which was an adaptation of Christopher Isherwood's Berlin Stories. Prince won the first of his 8 Tonys for Best Director, and someone else who won a Tony Award for their work on the show was legendary designer Boris Aronson, whose set is kind of integral to Prince's staging. A large mirror hung over the stage pointed at the audience with the image distorted. It starred, and this is the order they're billed in the playbill, Jill Howarth as Sally Bowles, Jack Gilford as the shopkeeper Herr Schultz, Bert Convy as Cliff, and Lada Lenya as the landlady Fraulein Schneider. And then in a separate billing block underneath that, you get Joel Grey as the MC, Peg Murray as Fraulein Coast, and Edward Winter as Ernst, all 3 of whom were nominated for their performances, and Grey and Murray won. Grey as the MC was the breakout character of the show, and it would become the signature role of his career, so that Tony win doesn't surprise me. But that Fraulein Coast as a Tony-winning role did surprise me, because it's such a small part. What did Peg Murray bring to it, I wonder? The only song she sings in the show, the reprise of Tomorrow Belongs to Me at the end of Act 1, unfortunately is not on the cast album. Lenya and Gilford were also nominated for Tonys in the leading categories. Those aren't the roles you think of as the stars of the show, and I think that speaks to some of the ways that the narrative works against itself. But before we get to the problems I have with the show, and I do have some problems with this show, we need to first talk about why Cabaret is credited with changing the American musical forever. To do that, we must define a term. A concept musical is a musical where the music, lyrics, book, set, and costumes are conceived of not individually, but as a whole in order to articulate the theme or metaphor of a musical. So in this case, the world of the Kit Kat Club and the cabaret acts performed there metaphorically tell the story of Weimar decadence curdling into fascism. There are earlier examples of concept musicals, but Cabaret was the first one to be a major success, and after it, the form was really never the same. And we have Hal Prince to thank for that, because it was his idea to tell the story that way and make the nightclub a central setting. Van Druten's play is set entirely in the boarding house, and Isherwood has some scenes set in nightclubs, but it's not one specific club, and it's never the focus. Despite this innovation, Cabaret is only half a concept musical. Half of it is a traditional book musical. There are songs that are performances at the club, like Two Ladies, and then there are songs that are just like any other song in any other musical, like Married. Fosse would do away entirely with the book numbers for the movie, and later revivals that turn the whole theater into a nightclub also attempt to take the concept further than Hal Prince did here while keeping the book songs. Because of those later versions, I think it's easy to dismiss just how revolutionary what Prince did here was. This is a time when Broadway musicals were not dark, they weren't provocative. This one is. It's cynical. World War II had been over for about 20 years at this point. The wounds were pretty fresh. Lenya actually fled Europe because of the Nazis. That they made this material into a musical at all was daring. Let's not lose sight of that. Okay, now time for my opinion. I know this is going to be controversial, but Cabaret has never really worked for me. On stage, at least. I think the movie is a vast improvement. I saw the Mendes revival with Alan Cumming and Emma Stone in 2014, and I saw the Frecknell revival on Broadway a couple of times. I didn't like either of those productions. But we're not here to talk about that. What did I think listening to the original album? Especially listening to it directly after Flora the Red Menace, I fully concede the brilliance of Kander and Ebb. This is so much more interesting than Flora's music. It is darker, more expressive. Ebb's lyrics are unpretentious, but so versatile. There are cute songs, there are really sad songs. And the irony that I associate with Kander and Ebb makes its grand entrance into their work here. It feels like Hal Prince as a director was the collaborator the songwriters needed to become the Kander and Ebb we think of today. This score is orders of magnitude better than their score for Flora. The music also gestures back to the Berlin of the time period, Weill and others. It's Kander and Ebb looking backward in subject and inspiration in order to move the art form forward. But like I said, I do have some problems with the material. On a basic level, I'm just not sure how effective satire singing Nazis is ever gonna be for me. In my last video, we talked about a certain glibness to the treatment of communists in Flora the Red Menace, and I think the same can be applied to the treatment of Nazism in Cabaret. Kander, Ebb, Prince, and Masteroff were all Jewish, and they took this subject seriously. I don't doubt their intentions. But it's a very fine line to walk. That the Nazi anthem in the show Tomorrow Belongs to Me has been co-opted by real-life neo-Nazis and white supremacists speaks to what I think is this show's problem with depicting things to shock the audience without much of a really worthy purpose behind it. The show is set in 1930 Berlin, so it can't have been too shocking when Cliff pulls out a copy of Mein Kampf or Ernst shows up wearing a Nazi armband. I think what would have been truly shocking to the 60s theater-going set is the vulgarity. Songs like Two Ladies, the abortion, the general naughty vibe of the MC. In addition to raunchiness just not being to my personal taste, I question the narrative function of it. Is the vulgar milieu of the club a symbol of Weimar libertinism, the very thing that brought Isherwood to Berlin, even if he doesn't say it? Or is it associated with the changing of the political tide? What is the actual role of the MC? He performs anti-Semitic songs and does the Nazi salute with the Kit Kat girls, but he's also queer-coded. Is he an agent of Nazism or a victim of it? Mendes certainly decides he's a victim of it. What's your interpretation of all this? I'm genuinely wondering if I'm totally missing the point here. Let me know in the comments. The salient point being made about fascism is that it's really easy not to notice when it's taking over. Which is a valid point, and one the show argues both through the drama and the music, but it's not exactly a profound insight. It also lends the show an air of gotcha. In order to demonstrate the subtle encroachment of Nazism into Berlin society, the show lulls the audience by entertaining them and then pulling the rug out from under them. If You Could See Her Through My Eyes being a prime example of this, the song presents as a silly love song, a novelty act, which is revealed to be an anti-Semitic joke. The audience is primed to laugh, and if they do, they quickly realize how insidious the joke is and how cruel the MC is for making it. In Prince's staging, the mirror hanging above the audience drops the distortion at this moment so the audience can clearly see themselves, either so they can catch themselves from laughing or sit in uncomfortable silence. That's the desired effect. It's provocative, by which I mean it's a provocation. It's a dare. But once the audience has figured out this trick, they quickly realize their values aren't being challenged. That's what makes it so easy for a director like Rebecca Frecknell to come along and completely remove all of the discomfort the audience is meant to feel. While I'm on the subject of If You Could See Her Through My Eyes, there's another big difference anyone who has seen the movie or a revival of Cabaret would definitely notice about this version, and it comes in the final lyrics of the song being, "She isn't a meeskite at all," instead of the more famous original lyric, "She wouldn't look Jewish at all." That's a massive pulled punch. Apparently, the original line prompted threats of boycotts from Jewish groups when the show was doing its out-of-town tryout, so Hal Prince decided to change it for Broadway, and severely dampened its impact. I mean, if you're gonna do it, do it. Commit. The other issue I have is a narrative one. Masroff's book owes a lot of debt to Van Druten's play for giving dramatic structure to Isherwood's writing, especially where the Cliff and Sally relationship is concerned. But that's where my issue lies. Cliff and Sally are ostensibly the main characters of the show, but they get seriously shortchanged. Even though he's the point of view character, Cliff doesn't sing a lot. He actually does sing more in this version than he does in any of the later ones. Perfectly Marvelous is a duet for him and Sally, and Why Should I Wake Up is a solo song for Cliff in Act 1. That one is the weakest song in the show, and all the revivals cut it. The idea of a non-singing protagonist seems to be intriguing to the creators. Kander would try it again with his 2015 musical Kid Victory, but it's debatable whether it ever actually works. I don't think it does in Cabaret, where the lack of Cliff's songs belies a lack of character. I get that the idea is, I am a camera. Cliff's a passive observer writing about what he's witnessed. He doesn't care until he does, and that's what gives the structure of this thing its spine. Shouldn't he sing at the end, then? When he finally has something to say? Bert Convey, who I only knew as the host of Super Password because I'm a big fan of 80s game shows, does an alright job with the singing. I get the reason the later productions cut Why Should I Wake Up, but if you're doing that, Perfectly Marvelous should go too, because as it stands now, it's a book song for characters who don't get book songs. In fact, Sally doesn't get to sing between Perfectly Marvelous in the first act and the title song deep into the second act. As a result, Sally gets lost on this album. Where is she? A big part of that problem is Jill Howarth simply is not a really captivating performer. I know the idea was to be true to Isherwood's Sally, who wasn't talented, but again, that's another intriguing idea that doesn't really work in execution. The contemporaneous reviews all ragged on her pretty hard, and I really don't want to regurgitate any old tired criticisms in these videos because I want to approach these shows with a fresh perspective, but I'm going to have to agree that Howard Sally holds the show back. The other issue at the heart of the show's Cliff problem is that they can't say he's gay. Or rather, they chose not to. The narrator of the Berlin stories was based by Isherwood on himself, and he's even called Christopher Isherwood in most of them. And he's gay in those stories. It's not a main area of focus. Isherwood would decades later write another memoir about his time in Berlin and go into detail. But it's definitely there. I suppose it's possible that the creators of the musical viewed Cliff, their version of that character, as closeted and they just couldn't get away with having a gay protagonist in 1966. But I kind of doubt that because the whole Sally pregnancy plot hinges on him having a heterosexual relationship. He's just straight in this version. Reincorporating the queerness back into the character is something that all of the revivals have had to contend with, none successfully because they can't do away with that pesky little thing, the plot of the musical. I think there's something to be said about the character's silence about his sexuality in his writings and his silence on political matters. It's a thread that Isherwood himself doesn't entirely pull together, but if you're adapting Isherwood decades later, you kind of have to do something with it. To sidestep it entirely is frustrating, to say the least. To give them some credit, there are certainly elements of queerness in the show. Lyrics in the telephone song, the MC's whole deal, and there's a bit of a cruising vibe to the scene where Cliff first meets Ernst on the train. It's time to reward Song of the Show. This is a tough one. This version of the score doesn't include iconic songs such as Maybe This Time, Money, Mine Hair, all of which were added for the movie. It does have several songs you've probably never heard of, such as the aforementioned Cliff song and Mieskeit, a song for Guilford's Herr Schultz. These obscure songs aren't terrible, but they're decidedly second tier. Winkelmann is the opening number and it's obviously very famous, but it's more of a mood center than anything else. Sally's numbers, Don't Tell Mama, and Cabaret are brilliantly written. They are really entertaining as nightclub songs, but they also establish Sally's character. They work on multiple levels of storytelling. But as I said, I have a problem with Howarth's performance, not to go back to this, but I really don't know why Prince cast her. In 1966, she was a 20-year-old British actress who had some film parts and TV roles, but no real stage experience, and she wasn't a singer. Apparently, Kander and Ebb wanted Liza to play Sally, which would have made sense coming right off of Flora, but Prince nixed the idea. The version of Sally that Liza would end up playing in the movie is kind of a completely reinvented character, and of course that's the version that became iconic. So I wouldn't give Song of the Show to any of Sally's numbers. The Schneider-Schultz storyline is sentimental and as subtle as a brick through the window, but I do love the songs that come from it. Married, It Couldn't Please Me More, What Would You Do are all great songs. There really never has been anyone like Lenya before or since, has there? That distinctive, borderline strange voice. Kander and Ebb must have relished getting to write for her, especially since her husband, Kurt Weill, is an obvious inspiration on the score. If you think you aren't familiar with Lenya's work, perhaps you'd know the knife-shoe-wielding Spectre agent Rosa Klebb. So let's go ahead and give Song of the Show to Married. Why not? It's not a number with Kander and Ebb's trademark irony. It's not one of those songs that mean the opposite of what the lyrics say. It's actually really simple and sweet. That's not a mode I associate really with Kander and Ebb, but it's one they surprisingly work well in. Time to rank. Given my pre-existing reservations about the show, I wasn't sure it was going to end up as high as most people would assume, but even with my issues, Cabaret is a fascinating, complex, rich text, and one that the boring, trite Flora the Red Menace can't hold a candle to. Number 1, Join us next time for a discussion of a musical I've never listened to so much as a note from, Robert Goulet in The Happy Time.